Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our most recent episode of We Are All Related. The We Are All Related committee is Pat Taliber, Susie Wright, and myself, Luann Brown. And this started out of the directional statement number 2, um, and our purpose in doing the We Are All Related series is to get some diverse perspectives on our directional statements and where we're going in terms of inclusivity and learning about diverse cultures and diverse people in the world. And so here we are. I was just talking to Pat before we started, and we have kind of lost track of how many we've done, but quite a few. And we've been doing this for about 2 years, every 3 months or so. So welcome to everybody, and I will turn this over to Pat for prayer.
Before we begin, let's take a moment or a pause to remember friends, family members who have passed, and all those in the South who are facing so many losses. To begin and to open, whenever we have a gathering of any kind, we say we open it. I always wondered what that meant. So, what I think is important is during the opening that we be intentional about our breath, the breath in and the breath out, because we're really opening ourselves up to a new space, a new time with people. So if you can just take a few cleansing breaths in and out, breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in anything that you need for yourself and breathe out anything you don't need. And take one more cleansing breath in and a releasing breath out. And I just like to read the O Sacred Spirit Spiral prayer that we have as a community, and continue to remember intentionally your breathing. Spiral of divine energy, always with us, relational life, alive and energizing, be with us. Moving in and out, up and down, back and forth, encompassing the spiral of death and life. Spiral spirit, all around, and within us, from margins to margins and back to the center. A path, a way, road that never stops, a journey that never ends, always moving, forever changing, carrying possibilities, opportunities, challenges, hopes, dreams, visions, always transforming, frightening, exhilarating, compelling. We move together in beloved community, steadfast love, enduring mission, from past to present, and thrust into an unknown future, but be with us. Meeting with my friend Denise Breton before this gathering, and she's our speaker for today, uh, she requested that this be a time of dialogue, that she will begin with sharing her story and other things, and maybe During her time, she may request me or you for your insights. And when she invites you into sharing, just put up the raised hand on your computer and we'll call on you. So it might be a yin and a yang, a flow to this time together. It is my delight now to introduce to you an inspirational, lovely woman, a path maker, a woman of vision, Denise Breton. She is a lifelong student of philosophy, spirituality, and social concerns. She has co authored The Soul of Economies, Spiritual Evolution Goes into the Marketplace, The Paradigm Conspiracy, Why Our Social Systems Violate Our Human Potential and How We Can Change Them, Love, Soul, and Freedom, Dancing Rumi on the Mystic Path, and The Mystic Heart of Justice. Her current book in progress is entitled Harm Dependent No More. We Are Winners and Losers or Relatives? She is a co-founder and executive director of Living Justice Press in St. Paul, which is a nonprofit publisher devoted to providing literature to support restorative justice movement. She is a daughter, sister, co-worker, dear friend, and she wrote this in one of her books to me. My whole heart sings to know you and rejoices every time I'm with you. I can't help it. So today I say to her, on behalf of all of us gathering here, our hearts sing to get to know you, Denise, and we rejoice that you are spending time with us. We can't help it. Now I invite Denise to begin by sharing a bit of her life story and perhaps deepen our understanding of her view of what is justice. Denise?
Goodness, Pat. What an intro. Goodness. Um, thank you so much for inviting me to be with you. This is a real privilege, and I hope to do it justice. And uh, yes, and I appreciate very much your saying that I would like it to be a dialogue. I'm I don't get out and I don't get out much. You know, publishing is a very a lot of, as they say, bottom on chair work. It's, you know, basically me and the two cats here. So I'm a cat lady. um, and uh, so it's wonderful to have an opportunity to dialogue with you. And here you are, you've been um, really putting deep thought into this immense subject of we are all related for many, many times, more than you can remember. So I, I'm just so grateful if we can, if I can learn what you've been thinking about. And you, Pat, you know me so well, so please jump in and say, Denise, you need to talk about this or that. I'd be very grateful. Um, So my story, books seem to be my life. They have been my life both as a writer and then as a publisher. Pat mentioned the books that I've written as well as one that I'm working on. I've been working on it since 2007, that last one. So when authors come to Living Justice Press and say, it's just taking me so long. I'm there like, you don't know how long. I understand because I do the same. Books take a lot of time. They take a lot of thought. And so after I finished The Mystic Heart of Justice, I felt I kind of had written, I thought at that time, which was around 2001, that I had written mostly my ideas, and I really wanted to see what others. I wanted to. I love editing. I love helping other people bring their ideas out. So I thought that's what I want to do now. I want to be in service to others and in terms of their writing and getting their thoughts out. And so with Kay Paranis and my mother being the biggest supporter all the way through, Pat knew her, and she passed in 2022. She, we all started Living Justice Press, which is, as Pat said, devoted to publishing books on restorative justice. And we do two areas, big areas. One is the peacemaking circle process, and the other is applying restorative justice to addressing harms between peoples. So, and so I laid out the books, not all, but most of our books behind. And it was really interesting to, I have them all in the basement, walk around and pick up each book and remember what it was to create each book. And one book I picked up is Pat's book, which had a huge impact, Building a Home for the Heart, using metaphors and value-centered circles. This book had a much bigger impact on Living Justice Press than any of us realized at the time, because it showed how to do circles, how to use metaphors to talk about values in circles. And it was done in a prison, you know, with Susan Thompson. And at the time, Kay Paranis said to me, you know, that book, it really made me think that people have trouble with circles because they don't know how to do them. You know, they don't know where to start. Even if they do trainings, they don't really know. So they're very practical, you know, with the questions and guiding people as to how to do it. Got Kay and Carolyn Boyce Watson thinking about, well, maybe we could do that to try to help get circles into schools. So that led to the book Circle Forward, which is here. It's a monster book. It's just enormous. It's 500 pages, you know, has a lot of paper. And it's the sale of this book that is paid for Living Justice Press. And we all work volunteer. And I got away with it because I lived with my mom and she was willing to share her you know, her pension with me so that we could live and do this work together. But we never got paid until this book started selling to schools. And then those sales now pay for all the other books we're doing, which is amazing. And it all started with what you were doing, Pat, which was how can we help people be present with others in circles and get to deeper places. And it's quite a gift. I mean, you have it, and others, you know, Kay does that all the time, and I imagine all of you have had time in circles. So that's the sort of the short form of our the idea of our publishing work and how it happened and how it continues to happen. I think in regard to We Are All Related, and I very much am aware of that, of course, in regard to being on Dakota land and land that has been stolen through genocide. So I felt half of our publishing, we should walk our talk. So we need to hold a space for Indigenous people, you know, the first people, can speak from their heart to us and share what's going on with them and what the history is and the harms that that they have suffered and from which we benefit. So half of our books are on that. The one, oh, where's, yeah, oh, here it is. This one, What Does Justice Look Like? I even got an award by Wazia Towing, came out in 2008. And this is, on the indigenous side, our bestseller. Isn't that something? And it's a no nonsense book. I mean, she doesn't mess around saying what happened because how can you? You know, it's a horrific history. And just this summer, we have now put this out as an audiobook as well. I don't even know how many printings we've done of this book. We usually do 2, 3, 4,000 books at a go, you know, because it's cheaper if you do more books. And so it's now out as an audiobook with Wazia Tomi, the author, who's from Upper Sioux, the Pezi Hutazizi Oyate, reading it. And we this came out in 2008. So as she was reading, she would update it a bit. So we've done a reprint with her updated things. It's just minor, like verb tense. But I really was grateful because I went into the bank. I had to walk into the bank, and I had a T-shirt on that had a native theme, and the teller was a young woman, a young white woman, and she looked at my T-shirt and said, "Wow, are you interested in Native stuff?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do publishing." And she said, "You know, in high school there was one book we read, and it just changed my thought, changed my thinking. And I love that book. I love that." Because she was going on and on. I was afraid to ask what was the book, but I did. I said, "What was the book?" "Well, wouldn't you know, it was that book." I mean, that kind of blew my mind. Uh, I'm just so grateful that it's out in the world doing its job to educate us as to how we got to where we are and who benefits and who doesn't benefit from that history. So, I mean, it's certainly, when I was thinking about We Are All Related, I can't imagine all the things that you have thought about, but one of the things that I think about is that we think it's wonderful. We are related, we're connected, we belong, we're here together. You know, that's really wonderful. But there's a big uh, challenge to that because if we do harm, we're all connected to that too. And we're connected to, you know, look at the hurricanes. I mean, that's connectedness at work. So connectedness isn't, and being related isn't all warm fuzzies. It's a challenge. How do we want to be related? You know, that's the book I've been thinking about since 2007, which is it all about being, who are we? Are we winners and losers, or are we relatives? And uh, a prayer I do all the time is, we are all related. Please help us be good relatives to each other. That kind of obviously touches me, especially with you guys for whom that means so very much. Do you want to say anything, Pat?
Sometimes words are not what should be done. when you take in another person's story, you know, your story is, for me, I can remember sitting with you. You're a dreamer, and I think you underestimate when you were at that. I think it was the University of St. Thomas, and I sat down next to you, and you and your mom shared with me that you were thinking of beginning a publishing, but you didn't have much resources and everything. And in your story touched me. Today I'm wearing a storytelling necklace that was a gift from one of our sisters, Susan Kohler, that Nancy Harding, our associate, who just passed away, had bought. And a week before Nancy passed, she said, Pat, would you like to have this? And I said to her, I said, um, well, I just had a visit with Nancy spiritually, and she said that I had something of hers that I would be wearing. And I said to Susan, I didn't have anything of hers. And so now I have something of hers. So when we talk about connected, and you do this so well, Denise, it's me sitting with you at that university and you telling your story. I think if we really listen with empathy to another's stories, that's when magic happens. Um, and you said, you turned to me. I remember thinking, how much do I have in my bank account? And I knew I could keep just so much, you know, to get through the month. And I remember writing you a check for the rest of that. And and but but it was like the link for me with you in your work, your outreach. And I think that's what I think you do with people, Denise. You They sit down with you and tell their story, and you link them into telling their story. Like what I mean, the title of that book, What Does Justice Look Like? Could you say more about that title of that book? I mean, what do you think is the premise of that book, of her writing? What does she think justice looks like?
Yeah, it is quite a story, and I want to follow up with what you're saying. Thank you for jumping in or responding, because you're the first person, aside from my mother, who ever donated to Living Justice Press, and you're the first one, and that was it. And it was before we did our first book, which is Peacemaking Circles from Conflict to Community. um, we had no clue how we were going to publish. And books are a really expensive habit to have. And you were the one who first donated, and then you also helped us generate the money to publish Justice is Healing. I left Justice is Healing downstairs. How could I do that? And and also Footsteps of Our Ancestors, which is about the Dakota Commemorative March. You also helped make that happen. Which is the story of the forced death march that the Dakota people were forced to make in 1862 to the concentration camp at Fort Snelling. So, what does justice look like? The way that developed, I was sitting with Wazia Tobin around her kitchen tables, or we all know kitchen tables, and she was talking about various issues like the pain of the genocide and the land loss and all these things, and and um, uh, and there were other things going on at that time, and they all centered around justice. And I said, was it, tell me, what do you think justice would look like here? And I, and of course, I'm always trying to start. It's the subtitle. It's the struggle for liberation in Dakota homeland. And so I said, maybe you could write about that. Just write that story of what's going on in your mind, both the history to educate us. And she was really happy to do it. And she wanted to keep it short. This is no circle forward monster 500-page book. This is very readable. It's even got pictures. Pictures are good. Where are all the pictures? Oh, there are pictures in here. So, what she thinks, it's a reparative approach that she has, four things that she says at the end that would um, be necessary to develop a peaceful coexistence. That's when I talk the indigenous people that I know, they're Dakota or Lakota. Um, it's like we always wanted coexistence, and it just didn't seem to be on your radar to think that way. You know, either we have the land or, you know, it was an either or win-lose situation. And we wanted to do, uh, well, for example, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, that was about, there was a war, and they said, we don't want to have war anymore. The US went to the Lakota and said, can we do a treaty to have peace among our peoples? And they said, yeah, let's do that. You know, so it's, there's an effort now to talk about restorative justice and treaties. And for Wazir she has different things that she specifies, but one of them is that there's a lot of public land that could be returned to Dakota people. This is Dakota homeland, and it wouldn't take anything away from any private settler landowner. So she's really trying to find a way to come together and be in a good way with each other, which is really a challenge given our history. So that's what this book, and amazing. I've had people in restorative justice, circle keepers, say they were reading this book and they got so upset they threw it across the room. And I knew they picked it up and read it. So it can get under your skin, but in a good way. I mean, they didn't make up this history, you know. Yours truly, you know, um, benefits from that. So, yeah, that's what her book is, and it's very, yeah, it, it's as I said, it's our bestseller, and uh, amazingly, I don't know if you know, probably you know, Pat, but I didn't know that Tim Waltz went down to Upper Sioux and they returned um, the park, a state park, which is exactly what. So I thought, I bet he looked at this book, you know. I mean, what do I know? I don't know whether it did or not, but some people did, and it did lead to land returns, so that's pretty cool. So,
Well, I'm thinking of it, Denise. Would you send a copy of that book to Reverend Tom Hoffman at St. Peter's Catholic Church? Because the Mendota group is now trying to negotiate return of land. Uh,
name
uh,
of it?
Tom Hoffman, Hoffman, and they're in negotiations right now. So that might be a good book for him to just receive.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to.
This is where it happens, folks, at the table or at the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, right. This is our table. This is our kitchen table.
Yeah, I'm just going to make a comment here, and then if anybody listening would like to raise your hand and ask a question, is that be all right, Denise? Yeah. Okay. I was invited to close the conference this past year at the University of St. Thomas with Christian Mobilizing Network with the Archdiocese. And they had a number of facilitators come in. They had to have a certain number of people to facilitate the circles. And so I thought, oh, they've spent these days together, right? Trying to think of how to shift their thinking around Indigenous peoples, around restorative justice, around justice. So I thought, what would be the metaphor? And so this was a metaphor. And I held my breath when I used metaphors because I never know. They came into the room and the chairs were in the opposite direction, not facing inward, but were facing outward. So for the first two passes, we had the first two passes with the introduction and the question with their backs to each other. And they were so unnerved by that. Each time they got the talking piece, they said, are we going to do this the whole time? You know? And eventually one of them got frustrated enough, got up and turned her chair around. And then then everybody looked around and I just sat there. One by one, they turned their chairs around.
Wow.
And I said to them, we don't need to have the circle anymore. I hope you've made that shift. I hope you've made a shift today that drastically, where you were so upset that you had to take some action. We did continue the circle, of course, but so the metaphor, but the shift, as you're talking about, what does justice look like? To be able to shift, just get enough information which you provide through your books to be able to have people make shifts is pretty remarkable. As educators, BVMs who are educators, that's been our path for years, educating people to the right truths, to know truth. The other thing about that and then if anyone wants to raise your hand, let's just see if there's anyone. When I was up in the Yukon this past year, um, I was I was told that we are related not by color, race, gender. And I looked at this elder and I said, well, how are we related? And he said, the water in you speaks to the water in me. We're we're 99% water, he said. So the water in you speaks to the water in me. That just blew my mind. It just made me realize goes way beyond, the demarcations that we make in our society in terms of race or color or gender or whatever, that it's that basic, he said. It's that basic.
Yeah, well, that shift that you're talking about, there's another book I want to share with you, especially since um, you mentioned the Catholic Mobilizing Network.
Mm-hmm.
This is our latest book, and it also a totally different story, but a wonderful story. Felix Rosado is the author, and let's circle up. Felix was 27 years in prison for murder, and there was a group inside the prison. This is Greaterford, which is now called Phoenix in the Philadelphia area. And the group, uh, Howard Zare and Barb Caves, both RJ's people, went up to Greaterford and visited with these men. And uh, they started doing a Let's Circle Up, which was a restorative justice education program. And they they developed this over 16, 17 years. They were working together. And I think they trained in RJ education over 1,000 men in that. And they would just go out through the prison and let them know there was going to be a training or, you know, it actually training is the wrong word. There would be a gathering to learn together about restorative justice principles and values. And they said restorative justice education is a restorative justice practice because it's so transformative. It just learning about restorative justice proved to be transformative for so many men. You know, it just changed them. It really changed them. Again, as you say, making the paradigm shift in how you think um, is is huge because then you act differently. Everything's different. So Felix, we worked on this book for about 5 years, and just it was so frustrating because we could not communicate with him in prison. It was so hard. He would work through the chaplain's office, and his family's Catholic, and so he worked with the chaplain there, and um, he 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 connected with his faith, and that was a very powerful, transformative thing for him. Um, and that NRJ is what brought him around, and so for his work. Someone recommended him, and then he jumped on it to have his sentence commuted. And that very seldom happens, but he was able to have that, and the governor signed his commutation. I mean, it took like 2 or 3 years to get that to happen. It didn't just happen. It took a lot of applying, reapplying, reapplying. And it was hard, as I was saying, in prison. He was working on a computer in the chaplain's office, and then the prison came and took it away with his whole manuscript on there. And just by connectedness, somebody knew about his work, and they were able to retrieve the manuscript off of that computer, and they sent it to me, because I need that manuscript, right? And so that's the story. This just came out in July of 2024, just a few months ago. And uh, Caitlin Morneau at the Catholic Organizing Network, whom I think you know her, Pat, and others may know her too. She's been a huge supporter of Felix's work and of his book, and the people who were involved with it. So we're just gonna see where this goes. It seems like every book we do has some impediment to it. I mean, Circle Forward, it has a section on, oh, hey, we've got a hand. I'm gonna stop talking because I want to hear it.
There have been 3 hands, but you must not be able to see them. Terry Hadro, Betty Gambonini, and Jackie
don't see
Kramer have had their hand up.
Yeah, we see the hands, but you were talking, Denise. I was going to wait till you finished. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm good.
Okay. Karen, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, please. Denise, you have your background blurred, so when you hold your books just off to the side, we can't see the titles. And the one you just held up is Justice Something Inside Up. What is the title of that book?
Justice from the Inside Up.
Okay, thank you.
How to blur that.
Luann, can you see the hands go up? Maybe you could call on people because I don't see anybody else's hand up.
I think people are raising their hands physically.
Okay.
If you know how to raise your hand electronically, that is easier for us to track. But I will I'll watch for raised hands if you don't know how to do that. Okay, Marilyn.
Yes, I just would like to say to Denise, what you said a few minutes ago about the treaties and the indigenous wanting to live in peace with one another, with others. And so I had the privilege of being at the National Museum of the Native, called they say the American Indian, but I would say the Native peoples. But there was this metaphor I felt in the art piece. There was a huge circle art piece that looked like silver, but there were 2 purple bands. And in the bands that represented the colonizing ships and the native canoe. And the idea was that these travel along together, but on separate paths, but in connectedness and unity and peace. But unfortunately, at the time that this image, and I think it was the treaty you mentioned, that's where it was. And then it was developed into this wonderful art piece in the museum. And it just struck me so deeply about how we can maintain our own identity, our own history, and yet we can travel together in peace. So I just share, I hope people could one day get to the museum or else look it up in a book. It is a magnificent piece. And everything in that museum is in circles. There's such a contemplative and circular spirit when you walk into it, there is this sense of peace, and that we can travel together and work out in a restorative way how we live with one another. So thank you for highlighting that and bringing that to our attention.
Oh, absolutely. When you say that, I think of the Two-Row Wampum for the Haudenosaunee, which makes the same point. there are two rows, so they go parallel. But that's the way to be in a good relationship with the two-row wampum. Yeah, same deal.
I imagine, Denise, when you're journeying with writers, you're impacted too and broadened by the oral history that's given to you, and especially Indigenous people to open up to you in that way. How does that come for you? Is that an easy process, or how does that how do you get engaged in that way?
So I've been doing that work for over 2 decades now. And I think for me, it's just what I do. I try to just be centered in who I am and just listen and see. It's very painful to hear, very painful, and to know that we have done so little to repair the mass harms and indeed crimes against their humanity. Speaking of being human, um, and just to, like, for me, trying to doing these books and creating a space for Indigenous people to tell their stories is my seems to be my path for trying to repair the harms. We first have to hear the stories, like your necklace. We need to know the stories. And then with that, we can come together and, you know, but I think I have in these 20 years learned to just sit with the pain of it and not try to fix it, not try to make it go away, to just feel that and then sort of, I don't know whether you call it prayer or whatever, but how will I be guided to do what's mine to do, you know, in response to this in the best way I know how. Does that speak to what you were?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just sense you have a quality of listening that is pretty profound and exceptional. That would be another book you could write about, oh, that quality, that value of listening, because whether we're listening to something we like or don't like, but to listen with compassion and empathy and understanding, because there's an energy between people that happens then, I think, that ignites a relationship and goes on from there. I remember in the Yukon when I was there this summer, I asked one of the elders, well, I love etymology of words with Indigenous people. So I asked about restorative, measures and reconciliation. What do they need for reconciliation? He looked at me, gave me this long stare, and said, "That's for you to figure out." He said, "We don't even have a word of reconciliation." He said, um, "That's very egotistical to think that way, that you think that you can come up with a way to, to make things better for people." He said, everybody needs to go into their heart and change personally. And I said, well, then I proceeded, since he took me down this hard path, I said to him, well, then how do you see it? How do you see it then, if you don't have a word for reconciliation? And he said, well, the best I can tell you, Pat, he says, my father, my mother, I was in boarding school. He said, the best I can say is we've got a word for acceptance. And he gave me that word. He said, in the moment we accept. It doesn't mean that cellular we're not damaged, but we accept that this is our reality. And then we go forward being kind and generous and good, so we can bring that back into balance. That's what's ours to do. Can you imagine that? You know, that their work is to be kind and generous and listening. And when I look at the Indigenous people today, I mean, they listen. They listen to us, and they're so kind. And I went to a Catholic conference last weekend. Oh, I was so angry at. They were so kind and generous, and Catholic. Mm, they had them sit in the back of the room. They didn't have the speakers up front. I mean, it was just so not the way they have taught me, you know, that's theirs to do. What's mine to do then, you know? And you've taken us on that path with restorative justice through the elders of the Yukon, to realize more deeply through your publishing. I think that's ours to do, you know. And so I had a lot to think about coming back from the Yukon with all the words that I asked them about. Because that's the way I think, you know, English. I know you've done some translation of some of your books too, haven't you? In other languages?
Yeah, Circle Forward is available has been translated into Portuguese. We don't, and let's see, this one, Indigenous Nations Rights in the Balance, which is the only book in the world that shows the original form of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as the Indigenous people themselves framed it. That's not the same as what the General Assembly approved. There were many changes to it that did not benefit Indigenous people. And the huge UN, they could all those nations, they could overwhelm nation states, they overwhelmed the Indigenous people. So this book is the only one. It compares, let me show you if I can. Oh, I thought we had, yeah. So, yeah. So we have like bands, the original version, and then there's a Human Rights Commission version, and then the General Assembly version. So we were talking recently and thinking we should just have an appendix of just the Indigenous original. It's there, but it's all broken up. And so that has just been translated into Spanish by a real strong Indigenous leader called Tupac, and he just passed away not too long ago, but he did the intro and he did the translation of this book. He knows Charmaine Whiteface, who's Oglala Lakota. So yeah, this has been translated. What else has been well, Peacemaking Circles. Oh my goodness. This one's translated into Ukrainian, I think Russian, Portuguese. Yeah, I mean, these books go around the world. I love books because they go out, they do the work. I just sit here and do more books, you know, and I never know what they do unless somebody tells me, you know. But obviously they're doing their job, you know, so I'm really grateful for that. You never know. Like I get a lot of single orders, you know, and I fill all the Amazon orders because they're so picky about having it go out fast. And so I run down the basement, I'm sending out these single orders, and every one I write a little note in there to people, and I think, where is this book going? And it goes all over. And I think, what are you gonna do, book, to, you know, to shift consciousness? Who knows? Who knows what it might do? You know, but that's what books do. That's why I love books. Oh, but Pat, you were talking about reconciliation. Quite a few of the Dakota and Lakota people I talk to really don't like the term reconciliation at all. They say, we were never together. You can only be reconciled if you had an original relationship. We didn't have that. I mean, we're not talking the water part, you know, but the people part. We were never together.
Mhm.
And so that is not what's going to happen. You've done us harm. You need to repair the harm, and then we can start to have a relationship. So there's that perspective on that as well that I've heard. You know, I think, well, I get that.
Mhm.
And then who does the repair? You know, in restorative justice, the victims say what needs to be done. You know, it's not those who have caused the harm, or who now benefit from it, that take the lead in saying this has to be done, that has to be done. You know, you got to listen to those who have been harmed. What, you know, and yet they also say, well, you figure out how to repair the harm. So I'm sitting with that because I'm not sure how it all goes together.
Mm.
It is a huge challenge, and I don't at all know the answer.
Mhm.
But I think as you know, you just listen, and um, for me, the issue is education, you know, and raising consciousness, raising critical awareness, um, inviting people to listen to those they might not otherwise have heard before
Mhm.
or in their life.
Mhm.
It's what I'm sure all of you do, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, and for me, the real action is to bring them to the table, the highest table, executive offices, congregational boards, um, until people of color, gender, and are brought to the highest table. That's for them is the point of entry. You know, that's a shift that we then have made. That we have made. We're journeying. Is there any? Oh, Luann, is there anybody else with a question for Denise? We're
I
journeying.
just see Eileen. I don't see another hand up.
Maybe Arlene, and then we can look at closing. I hate to even think of closing this, but
Eileen, you'll have to unmute.
Okay. I have a question. Living in a state that has rather strict book banning laws.
mm,
And I thought of that when the young woman in the bank spoke to you about the book.
mhm,
It is likely that that book would have been banned in Iowa.
mhm.
Have you heard of any of the books being banned? Just the thing, I mean, that is such a good place to get to kids
Mhm.
when they're a little bit open.
Denise, Denise has a wonderful story, a recent story
Yeah.
about her publishing company. Go ahead, Denise.
Okay.
Oh
Now,
God.
this book, which aside from being heavy, wouldn't hurt a fly, right? I mean, it's all about circles. It does have a section in it on race and also and racism, and also talking about LGBTQ issues which come up for in you know for, so the West Palm Beach School District was really excited about using this book. West Palm Beach, isn't that where Mar-a-Lago is? Well, certainly it's in the state of Ron DeSantis. So they ordered 830 of these books. Now, this is an expensive book. We give discounts all the time for everything, certainly for volume. But so we shipped them out. And right before they started using them, that law was passed in Florida. And they called me up and say, we got to return all these books because they will be banned. Hillsborough was one of the counties you hear on the news with the hurricane. We had been sending tons of these books to Hillsborough, not after that law of Ron DeSantis. And um, Texas, there's somebody there who, Dr. Lang, who works for the Texas Education Agency. It's like the Minnesota Department of Education. And She's a huge supporter. She called me up and she said, I can't, she was always using Circle Forward in all her trainings across the state of Texas. And believe me, that helped a little, it helped pay for all these other books. And she called me up, Denise, I can't use Circle Forward anymore. Not officially. She's trying. She now tells people, I'm not telling you, she's a character. I'm not telling you to buy this book, but I'm buying it and this is what I use. And she feels she can get away with that. She's a Black woman and she said, they'd throw me under the bus in a heartbeat, you know, if I were to use that book. I said, I know. And so we don't sell in Florida, we don't sell in Texas. Felix's book, Dr. Lang told me she's totally keen on it. She said because he's in for murder or was in for murder. I mean, he's really transformed and, you know, she said we can't use that book either. But she created a Zoom for Felix um, to talk about the book to social workers who go into prisons. And so she does what she can. But yeah, the book ban, not only the book bans, but the closure of DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, all that stuff has really hit us hard. We can't, our sales are like really down because there are just a ton of places where we can't use our or sell our books. And you're totally right. I mean, and Iowa is quite the one to where it was though. This talks about the concentration camp for Dakota men in Davenport, Iowa. Iowa really needs to have its history told, you know, so people can know what happened there. Many Dakota men were, you know, it was terrible, terrible. Several years in a concentration camp in Davenport, Iowa. A lot of Dakota people go down there to commemorate that and tell the stories of their ancestors and relatives, what they endured. So yeah, thank you for that question. Very, very much. That is an issue we are struggling with, and who knows what the future holds.
Mhm.
LaDonna?
Thank you, Denise, for sharing the richness of your publications. And will you send us a kind of a listing of everything you talked about today and maybe a few more?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Yeah. Well, Denise, the Ojibwe word is miigwech. Thank you. It means thank you from our hearts to you. Mm-hmm. I know this is a struggling time for you financially with your publishing company. So I lift that energy out to the universe and implore people to become aware of that. Money is energy. I keep trying to educate people along that line. And if we could energize that into your work, because then your work energizes through your books, wonderful things to happen. So, and I want to thank all of you for being part of this. You don't know how much it means to Luann and Susie and I to, first of all, meet with the people and to invite you. I know, Denise, you gave it some sacred time to think about what you wanted to share. And you come to this with such a strong heart and passionate heart. I love you dearly, kiddo. Mm-hmm. Support you. And I'd like to close on, and it's not a close. I hope this is an opening for you, kiddo, on so many dimensions. In any way we can support you, I'll look into some ways maybe. From your Mystic Heart of Justice, you spoke about unity and relationship. I just like to quote your words. It says, everything springs from the ground of unity, which creates a powerful connectedness among us. The message that mutual blessing within the web of life is not only possible, but also essential to survival. Before we close today, our Zoom meeting, not close this energy that we put out, I'd like to let everyone know that Susie and Luann and I have decided to continue the series in September 2025. However, we're open if anyone wants us to do something in between that time. We're open to consider that. But we thought we'd wait until after our assembly to really engage again. So I hope you can respect that, but also know that in the moment, we may need to do something different, and we're open to that too. So in closing, let us remember, as the spiral prayer in the beginning stated, we move together in beloved community of world, in steadfast love, enduring mission from past to present, which thrusts us into an unknown future. May it be an exciting unknown future, and together we will make it through. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Denise. I love you.
Thank you. Love you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. My goodness.